The official obituary was delivered to the officer's widow and his two young children. Lieutenant Colonel Muhammad Zahiruddin had, it records, been a source of inspiration to all ranks of the East Bengal Regiment. The Lieutenant Colonel had indeed been a special kind of soldier. Through much of 1944, Zahiruddin had served undercover, spying on Subhash Chandra Bose and sending back coded intelligence hidden in the propaganda broadcasts he was making on behalf of the Indian National Army. The work was so good, a special plane was sent to pick up Zahiruddin from Yangon when he finally emerged from a prisoner of war camp in 1945. Following the end of the war, Zahiruddin was made a member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire by King George VI, helped to found the Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate, and was promoted to Deputy Director General in the Pakistan Army's Military Intelligence Directorate. Then, on the 25th of February 1951, Lieutenant Colonel Zahiruddin shot himself through the head at a Lahore hotel. The official obituary, of course, doesn't tell us that, but there is one clue as to what had happened. The document shows that the officer held the rank of colonel while he'd served at military intelligence, but when he died, he was only a lieutenant colonel. Like so many great spies before him, Zahiruddin's life had been claimed by the tools of his trade, not the gun, but intrigue and deceit. Hi, and welcome back to this episode of The Print Explorer. As you'll know, Lieutenant General Faiz Hameed, Pakistan's former spy chief, who served under former Prime Minister Imran Khan, has become the very first Director General of the ISI to be charged with all sorts of crimes. He's being investigated for interfering in politics, for violations of secrecy laws, and with corruption. There are very few details available on the case, but it's clearly a remarkable story, and I'll be writing more about it as the case winds on. Today, though, I'll be taking a close look at a bigger picture. How did the ISI enmesh itself in the very guts of Pakistan's politics and emerge as the country's kingmaker? The conventional wisdom on the ISI is about its role as a tool of the country's strategic policies waging unconventional war across the world. There's, of course, a lot of truth in that story. But there's another story I'd like to tell today of the ISI's role in disciplining and punishing dissent within the military and policing the course of Pakistan's own political life. This is a story that slowly unfolded between 1951 and 1977 and holds the keys to understanding why Pakistan never truly developed a democracy. I'm deeply indebted to two superb books on the ISI by the scholars Owen Sears and Hans Kiesling. I've also drawn on the work of other experts, notably the scholar C. Christine Fair and her authoritative book on the Pakistan Army. All writing on the ISI has its limitations, of course, because there's no real tradition of archival disclosure on intelligence in our part of the world. And I hope one day that will change and an even fuller story can finally be told. The story began in a one-story building at the corner of what used to be known as Old Victoria Street and Sir Ghulam Hussain Hidayatullah Road in the heart of a Karachi, which was bursting with partition refugees. Like so many other institutions that emerged in both India and Pakistan after independence, the office ran more on prayers and hope than resources. There was very little furniture, so most of the staff used packing cases as chairs and tables. This unhappy mess would be transformed under the careful watch of the hardscrabble Major General Walter Crowthorne into world's most formidable and most ruthless intelligence services. Early in the course of the Second World War, Cawthorne had cut his intelligence teeth while serving as Director of Military Intelligence in Commander-in-Chief of the British Indian Army, General Archibald Wavell. Among other things, Cawthorne had worked alongside Peter Fleming, the legendary British spy who infiltrated and in some ways destroyed Subhash Chandra Bose and the Indian National Army. In case you're interested in knowing more about the story, I've written in ThePrint about Peter Fleming and the quintuple agent who enabled this triumph, the incredible Bhagat Ram Talwar. Following the independence of Pakistan, Cawthorne was appointed as Deputy Chief of Staff of the Pakistan Army. For the ISI's first chief, Cawthorne picked Syed Shahid Ahmad, who had been personal secretary to the last commander-in-chief of the British Indian Army. The scion of a storied Lucknow family and related to Pakistan's first Prime Minister, Liaquat Ali Khan, Brigadier Khan would then handpick the personnel who became the first generation of ISI officers. They had their work cut out for them. The departing British Empire had destroyed its intelligence files and even burned down the training material at the intelligence school it ran in Karachi. But the men who had served it were still there. Lieutenant Colonel Hameed was among the most talented of this cohort of Pakistan Army, ex-British Indian Army intelligence officers. Known to colonial intelligence officials by the code name Backhand when he had been paradropped into Myanmar, Hameed had been drummed out of the Indian Army in 1941 on charges of being a nationalist sympathizer. He had been reinstated in service a few months later, though, after the troops of the Ahir regiment threatened to mutiny because of the way he was treated. Later, demonstrating the flexibility of loyalty that is common to many successful spies, he turned pro-British and volunteered to parachute into Yangon and to spy on the INA. Following the end of the war, he was appointed to teach at the Intelligence Academy in Karachi. Then he went on to the ISI. There's some evidence that Hameed was not thrilled to be sitting in a tiny office in Karachi while his peers were earning glory in the first India-Pakistan War of 1947-1948. The war, though, would teach Pakistan some very painful lessons. Even though Major General Akbar Khan, who led the Kashmir campaign of 1947, had proved a brilliant tactical operator, manipulating tribes to attack India and keeping the Pakistan army hidden just behind them, it soon became clear there needed to be better intelligence and structure if covert war against India was to have any hope of succeeding. For much of the 1950s, thus, the ISI sat out what Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru described as an informal war in Kashmir. The first shots in this informal war were fired in 1951 when saboteurs began setting bridges and government buildings on fire. 14 conspirators were eventually tried for the attacks, of whom 9 were convicted. The charges brought in the case led to the first mention of Pakistani state-sponsored terrorism in India, naming Abbas Ali Shah, the superintendent of police in charge of the Criminal Investigation Department in Rawalpindi, and a military officer called Major Asghar Ali Shah. There were fears in the United Kingdom, especially, about how effective the ISI would really be. The Pakistanis were leaking sensitive information in all directions, lamented one British official, and there were well-founded suspicions its bureaucracy was being targeted for penetration by the Soviet Union's intelligence services. Britain stepped in, working to plug the holes. In 1953, for example, the ISI director and the British Director General of Military Intelligence met to create a joint intelligence committee type system in Pakistan, like the one they had in the UK. 2 years later, the United Kingdom's Joint Intelligence Committee hosted Director General designate Brigadier Malik Sher Bahadur, who had inquired about joint intelligence methods. The United Kingdom, interestingly, was also seeking to deepen its intelligence relationship with India, hoping vaguely for some kind of united intelligence sharing mechanism to operate under the Commonwealth framework. But London's efforts to build ties with New Delhi with much more difficulty than the outreach to the ISI. Guy Liddell, who would rise to be the second in command of the British Security Service MI5, was deeply suspicious that India's new Defence Minister, Krishna Menon, was a communist mole. Liddell voiced concerns that Menon's long-term relationship with Bridget Tunnard, a British communist sympathizer, meant anything he was told would end up in Moscow. Efforts were made by the first Indian Intelligence Bureau Director T.G. Sanjeevi Pillai to develop ties with the United Kingdom, but they kept running into this Krishna Menon problem. Little, in one of the great ironies of history, would himself being end up suspected of being one of five top KGB double agents who had been planted inside the British intelligence service, and though the allegations were eventually disproved, they cost him his career. Things didn't go much better for the ISI either, at least in this period. In 1951, the architect of the Kashmir operations, Major General Akbar Khan, was arrested on charges of trying to mount a coup against the government. The left-leaning Khan was a friend of Lieutenant Colonel Zahiruddin, who was demoted by the army chief General Ayub Khan. To General Ayub, it seemed that the ISI and military intelligence just weren't doing their real job, which was protecting the institution of the army itself from subversion. In disgrace and demoted a rank, Lieutenant Colonel Zahiruddin committed suicide. Major General Nawabzada Sher Ali Khan would later write that what came to be known as the Rawalpindi conspiracy case, and I quote here because it's interesting, started a witch hunt and surveillance of senior officers of the army who had any kind of standing and following. And this surveillance was not only confined to people whose normal duty it is to do with this kind of work in any state, but a witch hunt within the army was started and brother officer was encouraged to spy on brother officer. And that was the moment the ISI's sunrise really began. From 1953, the army began to push for an increasingly direct role in Pakistan's politics as Ayub Khan unleashed it against his adversaries. Less than 2 years after Iskandar Mirza became the first president of Pakistan, the ISI played a key role in bringing about his downfall. In October 1958, amid a stream of alarmist intelligence reports indicating rising Indian influence in East Pakistan, today Bangladesh, President Iskandar Mirza abrogated the constitution and declared martial law with General Ayub's backing. The two men just didn't trust each other though. Even as Iskandar Mirza leaned on the intelligence bureau, that is the civilian intelligence service, to inform him about Ayub's moves and intentions, Ayub used his military service and the ISI to spy on the president. According to one credible account, the ISI intercepted a phone call between President Mirza and a cabinet minister in which the president reportedly asserted that he would sort out Ayub in a few days. Ayub, of course, acted on this intelligence and staged a coup on the 27th of October 1958. Mirza and his wife were bundled on a plane to London. The only man present to see them off at the airport, his name will be familiar, was Cawthorne. Yes, the ISI founder who had by then become Australia's High Commissioner to Pakistan and begged General Ayub to spare President Mirza's life. Cawthorne, by the way, would have a stellar career in subsequent years and go on to found Australia's intelligence service, ASIO, which is today among the world's most effective services on things in the Pacific region and China. Following Ayub Khan's rise, the CIA developed an even closer relationship with the ISI. The relationship became public when American U-2 spy plane pilot Francis Powers was shot down over Soviet territory on the 1st of May 1960, having taken off from Peshawar. There were strains under the administrations of President John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, but under President Richard Nixon, the relationship flowered again. As documents in the public domain reveal, Nixon personally liked General Yahya Khan and other Pakistani generals, whereas on the other hand, he referred to Indira Gandhi as, and I quote, an old witch. The relationship became particularly important as Nixon's Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, conducted secret diplomacy intended to wean China out of the Soviet Union's orbit. The ISI played a key role in facilitating those negotiations and discussions. Ayub importantly expanded the ISI's domestic mission while the MI being military intelligence, began to focus mainly on military threats from India. Ayub also asked the ISI to expand surveillance and internal security in East Pakistan because he did not fully trust the Intelligence Bureau office in Dhaka. As one author notes of the ISI's expanded powers during the Ayub years, I quote, the ISI began to function like intelligence organizations in other dictatorships, tapping the phones of opposition figures, harassing critics of the military regime, conducting media campaigns, intimidating influential citizens, and carrying out occasional assassinations. To solidify the transformation of the ISI mission, Ayub removed ISI's director, Brigadier Muhammad Hayat Khan, and replaced him with Brigadier Riaz Hussain, his own personal confidant. Unlike his predecessors, Riaz would enjoy a very, very long tenure. I think he spent from 1959 to 1966 at the ISI, during which he presided over a massive expansion of its political capabilities for surveillance and direct abilities to intimidate and browbeat leaders. The War of 1965, though, exposed the consequences of this internal focus. In a post war assessment, the British military attaché in Karachi argued that a lack of intelligence was one of the major contributing factors to Pakistan's terrible performance in that war. Notably, the failure to track India's 1st Armoured Division prior to hostilities, compounded by India's surprise attack on 6 September, which really should have been no surprise. General Ayub Khan, in turn, was pushed out by General Yahya Khan in the wake of this military disaster. Ayub had failed to contain widespread protests that raged across Pakistan in 1969. Yahya's focus, naturally, was on trying to contain some of the internal discontent. Among his uses of the ISI was to aggravate centrifugal forces within the Awami League in East Pakistan. He funded Abdul Hamid Khan Bashani, a socialist activist who was a thorn in East Pakistan leader Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's side. This game failed with catastrophic consequences. Yahya, in turn, would be forced out by the War of 1971. The weapon forged by the generals was wielded enthusiastically by the politician Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who became President and Prime Minister of Pakistan in the wake of that catastrophe. In 1973, there was a conspiracy among younger officers of the Army and Air Force who blamed Bhutto and the generals for the loss of East Pakistan and their defeat by India. They succeeded in persuading a brigadier and a colonel to lead their plot, but the ISI received well-timed information about the case, which came to be known as the Attak conspiracy case. The ISI observed the group for months undercover until they struck. Major General Zia, then Major General Zia-ul Haq, headed the subsequent court proceedings and used the opportunity to offer his services to Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and emerge as his key man in the military. The conspirators in the Attak case received life sentences. Bhutto and some generals demanded the death penalty, but they did not get a court majority in favor of capital punishment. In 1975, though, a directive from the Prime Minister's office meant the ISI was boosted by the setting up of an internal political cell. The cell had, as I mentioned, already been secretly installed by Ayub Khan, but it now was formally endorsed by the state system and could thus expand quickly. Bhutto then allowed the Intelligence Bureau to set up a parallel special cell in order to be kept informed about tendencies and developments within the military. In other words, to have one set of spies spying on the other set of spies. But the Intelligence Bureau's attempts to install a network of informers in the cantonments among former officers had little success. The ISI and military intelligence recognized what was going on and relayed appropriate reports to the general headquarters. The active officer corps was warned, and which resulted in the Intelligence Bureau being widely mocked and discredited. As Zulfikar Ali Bhutto pondered his re-election campaign in late 1976, trouble began to brew in the army. On 3 December that year, Director General of the ISI, Ghulam Jilani, sent a memorandum to General Zia ul Haq, which he copied to Bhutto, warning of Islamist forces in the ranks. Crude posters had been found in a Multan barracks calling for a army revolution. In the margins of this report, Bhutto wrote a very accurate prediction of how Zia's religious temperament was affecting the new army. I quote, such teachings became dangerous only when the chief of army staff gave them official blessings and respect. This will boomerang. That is why I told you in my first letter that I do not want a mullah army. This was all very well and fine, but a little too late. Leading up to the 1976 coup, Bhutto found himself facing widespread political protests again. ISI chief Ghulam Jilani warned Bhutto that the army was in an advanced stage of a coup. The prime minister tried desperately to ask each of his corps commanders to state where their loyalties lay. The outcome, though, was predestined. The ISI, the very chief who warned Bhutto, was in fact on the side of Zia, together with all of the corps commanders. Bhutto was jailed and, as we know, eventually hanged. General Zia's new military regime was initially isolated, but Afghanistan would prove a gift to the dictator. The period would give the ISI the tools it needed to become something bigger than just a domestic surveillance organization, to one that could in fact wage intense covert war against India, first in Punjab, then in Kashmir. The ISI chief who led the Afghan campaign, Akhtar Abdul Rahman, had in fact an interesting India history. He had been escorting a refugee train to Pakistan when Hindu soldiers seized him and tied him up. Akhtar had all but given up hope for his own life when he was rescued by some Muslim soldiers. General Akhtar therefore hated India and at the ISI would get his chance for revenge. The enemy wasn't just India though. Brigadier Imtihaz Ahmad, who became boss of the ISI's internal security operations in the Zia days, pursued the dictator's opponents with a vigorous that earned infamy during Operation Midnight Jackal, which was aimed at the ouster of then Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's daughter. Former Director General of the ISI, the late General Hamid Gul, was open in saying he was instrumental in the formation of the Islami Jamhuri Ittihad alliance created ahead of the 1988 elections to stop the return of Benazir Bhutto to power. There are plenty of other DGCs or Director General Cs, the heads of the ISI's internal operations, who ended up playing what in other countries would be called a treasonous role. Major General Ehtesham Zamir is known to have birthed the Pakistan Muslim League Quaid-e-Azam faction under General Musharraf and persuaded enough People's Party of Pakistan legislators to switch sides and put the PMLQ in power. He is on record in an interview detailing how he managed to place a coalition government that was subservient and rubber-stamped the wishes of his boss, General Parvez Musharraf. In 1996, former Air Marshal Muhammad Asghar Khan had filed a petition in the Pakistan Supreme Court accusing the ISI of doling out some 140 million rupees to a group of politicians in the 1990s. Among the people accused in that petition were former Army Chief Aslam Beg and former ISI Director General Lieutenant General Asad Durrani. General Durrani confirmed the allegations in an affidavit to the Supreme Court. In it, he admitted his role in the affair, named the other players, and elaborated on how the whole plot had unfolded. Following a landmark judgment in 2012, the Supreme Court asked the Defense Ministry to initiate necessary action. General Durrani was hounded for speaking out and spent a considerable length of time being forbidden from moving outside Pakistan. But there was never the inquiry the court had ordered or any action against the people involved. The case went nowhere. The story of the growth of the ISI into a monster that not only attacks Pakistan's enemies outside its fence, but bites everyone inside the house is a cautionary tale about what happens when spies are allowed inside the chicken coop, as it were. There is even today no one to guard the guard dog. Even though General Faiz might end up in prison because of his relationship with one prime minister, the system hasn't changed. Remember, the man who is now prosecuting him, Pakistan's current army chief Asim Munir, was himself in the ISI doing exactly the things his successor is now being punished for. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm a contributing editor to The Print. Thank you for joining this episode of The Print Explorer.